Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Our lecture today is about the digestion and absorption in GI tract. Objectives: we are going to describe the digestion and absorption of the different types of food and electrolytes and discuss their disorders. First of all, we start with the digestion of carbohydrate. Because the food remains only for a short time in the mouth, only 3 to 5% of all starch, of all carbohydrate that have been eaten will be digested by enzyme alpha amylase. نسميه salivary alpha amylase حتى نفرقها عن pancreatic amylase. The salivary alpha amylase is going to hydrolyze the starch to a disaccharide, maltose, and other small polymers of the glucose. The action of the enzyme can continue for up to 1 hour after the food has been entered to the stomach. Then the action will go to block by hydrochloric acid and gastric secretion. About 30 to 40% of the starch of carbohydrate will hydrolyze mainly to maltose. Then when this disaccharide going to reach to the small intestine, the pancreatic secretion, نقصد به pancreatic amylase, and also we have large quantities of amylase that continue to splitting the starch into maltose and other small polymers of glucose. Then the brush borders, the epithelial cells lining the small intestine, contain different types of enzymes. Lactase, sucrase, maltase will going to split this disaccharide to simple monosaccharides اللي هي lactose والsucrose والmaltose, and to be easy to be absorbed by the epithelial lining of the small intestine. Lactose intolerance is the most common cause of carbohydrate malabsorption. It results from the inability of the goblet cells to produce lactase enzyme, and this will lead to diarrhea, bloating, and also this take place in a newly born baby suffer from this gastrointestinal disorders because of the absence of the lactase enzyme that's secreted from the goblet cells and the epithelial lining of the small intestine. The digestion of fat, the first step of the fat digestion is to break down the fat globules to small size, so that is be easy to be destroyed by the pancreatic enzymes or the digestive enzymes and the enzymes that released from the small intestine mucosa. طبعا first of all احنا نقول انه الفات molecules tend to cluster, and the effect of the bile salt by the emulsification going to destroy this fat globules to small droplets, and this be easy to be digested by the pancreatic enzymes اللي هي lipase والcholesterol esterase والphospholipase A2, and also the epithelial cells of the small intestine also contain minute quantity of lipase, and we call it the enteric lipase, also very important help in the destruction of this fat molecules. إذن أول عندنا الeffect of bile salt and aided by the lecithin اللي هو موجود released from the intestinal mucosa, وبالإضافة إلى pancreatic enzymes، وبالإضافة إلى وجود different types of the enteric lipase الموجودة and released from the intestinal mucosa, going to destroy the fat globules to small droplets that is easy to be destroyed and become easy to be absorbed. Now the digestion of protein، عادة البيبسين اللي هو active form of pepsinogen is capable of digestion essentially for different types of protein in the diet. Pepsin طبعا هو ينطرح على أساس pepsinogen, and by the effect of hydrochloric acid in the stomach يتحول إلى الأكتيف form اللي هو pepsin, responsible for the destruction of about 10 to 30% of total protein. This is in the stomach. Most protein digestion occur principally in the small intestine under the influence of the proteolytic enzymes اللي are released from the pancreas, التريبسين and chymotrypsin and other types of pancreatic أو proteolytic enzymes اللي طرقنا لها بمحاضرة البنكرياس. Split the protein molecules into small polypeptides, and the brush borders also of the small intestine also contain several different types of enzymes that are responsible for the digestion of protein. يعني بالإضافة يعني البيبسين أول شيء started the first steps for digestion of protein, وبعدين تكمل by pancreatic enzymes also by the enzymes that release from the intestinal mucosa. Now, the absorption in GI tract. First of all, the absorption in the stomach. Although the gastric enzymes begin breaking down the proteins in the stomach, the wall is not the wall of the stomach نقصد. It is not well adapted to absorb the digestive products. يعني عادة يعني الجدار المعدة غير مهيئ لامتصاص يعني this digestive products. However, the stomach can absorb small quantities of water, glucose, certain salts, alcohol, and some lipid-soluble drugs. Most nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine, and the small intestine تعتبر the master place for the digestion and absorption of the different types of food. But alcohol, which is not nutrient, it is absorbed completely in the stomach. That's why the intoxication effect of alcohol appear very soon after consuming of this beverage. يعني عادة alcohol absorbed completely from the stomach wall. ولذلك الأشخاص يعني اللي يتعاطون الكحول تشوف ورا فترة جدا قصيرة تظهر عليهم ممكن تكون أعراض شديدة، تقيؤ وال يعني والانتوكسيكيشن، يعني أعراض مثل ما نقول التسمم نتيجة يعني الامتصاص السريع للكحول من قبل الستومك وول. Now, the absorption أو يعني in the small intestine عادة the villi and microvilli greatly increase the surface area of the intestinal mucosa. طبعا عادة الintestinal wall it is يعني خلينا نقول prepared and it is able for absorption of different types of the digestive food. The carbohydrate digestion began in the mouth. The first step of digestion of carbohydrate by alpha amylase in the mouth, and يعني عادة complete the absorption in the intestine by enzymes from intestinal mucosa, and for the pancreatic enzymes اللي هو pancreatic amylase. The result هو monosaccharide, simple saccharide, are absorbed by the villi and enter to the blood capillaries. Simple sugars are absorbed by active transport and by the facilitated diffusion. Now, this is the picture of villi and the brush borders الموجودة يعني mucosa lining of the small intestine. Now, the protein digestion begin in the first steps of protein digestion when بالstomach by the effect of البيبسين اللي هو الactive form of pepsinogen, and then completed in the small intestine عن طريق البنكرياتيك proteolytic enzymes، وبنفس الوقت وجود intestinal different types of intestinal enzymes يعني that release from intestinal mucosa and break down into amino acids that is absorbed by the villi of the small intestine عن طريق by active transport and carried to the blood. Regarding to the fat molecules are digested entirely by pancreatic enzymes and by the intestinal mucosa enzymes. The resulting fatty acid molecules are absorbed in the following steps. طبعا absorption of fat عادة ياخذ عدة يعني خلينا نقول مراحل لحد ما يوصل إلى البلاد ستريم. First يعني خلينا نقول step, the fatty acid molecules dissolve in the epithelial cells membrane of the villi and diffuse through them. Then the endoplasmic reticulum of these cells use the fatty acids to synthesize fat molecules similar to those previously digested, and then these fat collected in clusters and become enclosed by a protein, the resulting large molecules of lipoprotein, we call it the chylomicrons, that are make their way to the lacteal اللي هي الليمفاتكس يعني الموجودة بالفيلاي. The periodic contraction of smooth muscle of this villi help to empty this lymphatics into the thoracic duct, and the lymph carries these chylomicrons to the bloodstream and then transport to the this to the to be خلينا نقول stored in the muscle, in the adipose tissue, in the liver, and the remnants يعني of the chylomicrons travel to the blood يعني أيضا ما قلنا to the liver. Some fatty acids with relatively short carbon chains absorb directly يعني ما تحتاج إلى هذه الستيبس مال absorption, directly absorbed by the blood capillaries of the villi, and يعني طبعا نتيجة يعني absorption ما تكون easily، ما تحتاج إلى أن تدخل عن طريق الليمف وبعدين توصل إلى البلاد ستريم. The intestinal villi absorb electrolytes and water. Certain ions such as sodium, potassium, bicarbonate are يعني very easily to be absorbed. Other ions including calcium, magnesium, sulfate are poorly absorbed. Electrolytes are usually absorbed by active transport and by the water absorbed by osmosis. We are going to discuss certain disorders of GI tract. طبعا عادة يعني common disorder of GI tract عادة عندنا الديارية اللي هو increase the peristalsis due to the يعني enteritis، يعني there will be inflammation, there will be infection بالحقيقة يعني by viruses, by bacteria, lead to loss of fluid and electrolytes in the stool. عندنا another disorder اللي هو vomiting اللي نسميه emesis، اللي هي عبارة عن forceful expulsion of the contents of the stomach and the upper part of the intestinal tract يعني from the duodenum خلينا نقول through the mouth. عادة يعني the content مال stomach أو the first part of the small intestine can be خلينا نقول forceful expulsion، ينطرح بقوة عن طريق المouth. The vomiting is a reflex coordinated by the vomiting center, controlled by vomiting center in the brainstem, or by activation of the chemoreceptors trigger zone that also presented in the brainstem. The vomiting is usually preceded by increased salivation, sweating, increased heart rate, pallor, feeling of nausea. طبعا this is a characteristic features of sympathetic stimulation. يعني عادة vomiting يعني there will be stimulation, sympathetic stimulation يعني أو controlled by sympathetic nervous system بحيث يعني يصير عندنا vomiting وهالأعراض كلها تكون يعني خلينا نقول مواتية أو مجاورة إلها. The vomiting begin steps. أول شيء يصير عندنا deep inspiration, there will be closure of the glottis and يعني elevation of the soft palate حتى طبعا يصير إغلاق للsoft palate، وبعدين يصير عندنا الabdominal and thoracic muscle contracted, raising the abdominal pressure. The upper portion of the small intestine contract and tend to force some of intestinal content back to the stomach, and the some of the bile may be presented in the vomits. يعني عادة المواد اللي نتقيئها ممكن يصير بها كمية من ممكن بها كمية من البايل، لأنه هي يعني تنطرح من السمول انتستين عن طريق الاستومك وتطلع إلى عن طريق الفم. The lower esophageal sphincter relaxes and the higher abdominal pressure force the contents of the stomach or the contents of the small intestine into the esophagus and through the mouth. طبعا عندنا يعني خلينا نقول the initial sequences of events can occur repeatedly without the vomiting، وهذا نسميها retching اللي احنا بالعامية نسميها الترجوعة. هم يصير عندنا ديب انسبيريشن وكلوجر وهذني الستيبس الممكن، بس ما يصير عندنا خلينا نقول forceful expulsion of the content of the stomach أو content of the small intestine. يعني يصير عندي يعني هاي الديب انسبيريشن، يصير عندي الكلوجر اوف هذا، يصير عندي هاي الستيبس ممكن تصير عندي، بس مع اختلاف انه ما راح يصير عندي يعني خلينا نقول the يعني expulsion or forceful expulsion of the content of the stomach أو content of the small intestine. فش أسميها enriching. Now يعني in summary to our lecture إن ال vomiting center will receive stimuli from the يعني أو يعني summary to the يعني vomiting يعني vomiting disorder إنه يعني how the vomiting take place. عادة نشوف إنه vomiting center will receive stimuli from the upper GI tract. يعني signals receive stimuli through the vagus due to irritation of the upper GI tract مثلا stomach, duodenum, esophagus, pharynx. ممكن مثلا واحد يعني يتناول طعام مثلا بأسيد أو مثلا طعام بفد infection أو مثلا يعني something يكون مثلا digest toxic substances, infectious materials. فهاي الستيمولاي عادة تروح المن stimulate the vomiting center موجود وين بالبرينستم. أو مثلا يكون عندنا emotional stimuli through the limbic system فممكن يصير عندنا الفوميتنج. يعني vomiting center also stimulated عن طريق مثلا sight, smell, taste. يعني واحد يشوف منظر يعني ما يعجبه أو يشم ريحة ما تعجبه أو مثلا يتذوق فد شيء ما يعجبه. فهاي يعني كلها تعتبر emotional stimuli stimulate عن طريق الليمبيك system stimulate the vomiting center. أو irritation of the vestibular apparatus of the ear عادة during the rapid يعني motion. مثلا هذول عادة يسافرون مثلا هذول يسمونه يعني يصير عنده vomiting مثلا يركب سيارة يسوق سرعة أو مثلا مسافة طويلة يصير عنده vomiting. drugs for example المورفين. طبعا المورفين يعتبر يعني very important. It is not act on the vomiting center وإنما going to stimulate the chemoreceptors zone in the medulla oblongata and this responsible to form severe vomiting. عادة المورفين ما ننطي IV المورفين ما ننطي IV يعني عادة ننطي IM يعني ما ننطي عن طريق الوريد لأنه يسوون السيفير vomiting فنطي عن طريق العضل عادة. وأذر drugs أيضا ممكن يسوي لنا vomiting بس المورفين يعتبر خلينا نقول the master drug to form the vomiting. يعني causes of vomiting إنه stimulation of the vomiting center لأي سبب من الأسباب. يعني irritation to the upper GI tract, emotional stimuli, irritation of the vestibular apparatus, drugs. ممكن طبعا vomiting ممكن أيضا يصير بالبريجننسي يعني وهذا طبعا يعتبر one يعني of the symptoms of pregnant females عند vomiting. بس هذا ما نعتبره under the effect of hormones. بس احنا ما نعتبره هذا في pathological condition. احنا عادة نعتبر vomiting هي pathological condition لكن هنا بالpregnant female ما أقدر أعتبره pathological condition ولا هو مو فد شغلة يعني physiological مو فد شغلة طبيعية. بس بالنسبة للpregnancy ممكن نعتبره أنه شغلة طبيعية كتعتبر كسيمتوم واحدة من symptoms of the pregnancy. Now in summary to our lecture عادة only 3 to 5% of all starch that have been eaten will have يعني digested by enzymes as salivary alpha amylase. Pancreatic secretion in the small intestine contains a large quantities of pancreatic amylase, continuous splitting of starch to maltose and other small polymers of glucose. The brush borders of the intestinal mucosa contain enzymes that are going to destroy this disaccharide to simple monosaccharides. يعني طبعا the first steps of fat digestion أيضا يكون يعني عادة by bile salt and by lecithin by process emulsification destroy the this fat molecules to small droplets and enable the pancreatic enzymes where mucosa lining enzymes from the small intestine to digest this خلينا نقول fat to small خلينا نقول يعني أو simple fatty acid. وبالنسبة للبروتين digestion عن طريق البيبسين هو active form of pepsinogen أو يعني about 10 to 30% of total protein started digestion in the stomach and continue digestion by proteolytic enzymes, pancreatic proteolytic enzymes and by the enzymes from the brush borders of the small intestine to simple يعني amino acids. The stomach wall is not adapted for the absorption لكن ممكن يصير عندنا simple يعني مثلا عندنا مثلا absorption by water, some electrolytes, glucose, some drugs can be absorbed by the small intestine أو العفو from the stomach wall. وكذلك الكحول absorbed العفو عفو الكحول absorbed يعني completely by the stomach. بالنسبة للabsorption عادة المونوسكرايز absorbed by the mucosal lining of the small intestine enter to the blood capillary. Simple sugars are absorbed by active transport and facilitated diffusion. Amino acids will absorbed into the villi by active transport, carried to the bloodstream. The fatty acid عندنا يعني many steps أو يعني that طبعا simple fatty acids يعني simple fatty acids can be absorbed directly to the blood اللي with a small carbon chain, بينما البقية dissolved by the epithelial cell membrane and diffuse بالendoplasmic reticulum, going to be خلينا نقول synthesize the fat molecules similar to the previously digested and then encased by a protein يسوي لنا كايلومايكرون. والكايلومايكرون يعبر عن طريق الليمفاتكس للاكتيال of the villi يوصل للثوراسيك داكت وبعدين عن طريق الليمف ينقل إلى البلاد ستريم وينخزن بالمصل أو بالأديبوز تيشو أو بالليفر. عادة intestinal villi absorb electrolyte, water and certain ions, sodium, potassium, bicarbonate, usually easy to be absorbed, بينما عندنا الكالسيوم, magnesium, sulfate are poorly absorbed. Electrolytes are usually absorbed by active transport and the water by osmosis. طبعا عندنا some questions about our lecture today. Thank you.